Hello, and welcome back to Chillers and Thrillers. In this podcast, I'll read stories of people's real encounters with the strange and unexplained. No comedy, no gore, and no true crime. I'm reading stories I found throughout the years on the internet and always credit the writer when possible. But of course, as always, I would love to hear from you. I may slightly edit some stories for clarity, brevity, and just to ensure the language is safe for all ears. For today's episode, I've gathered a collection of bone-chilling stories from people who have experienced firsthand the terror that resides within their own homes due to different types of hauntings. So let's get started. Blood Ben by user SpookyKara. When I was almost 24, I moved into my first apartment after a spring semester living in a dorm as a non-traditional student. I pre-applied for an apartment and signed the lease sight unseen. I did have a courtesy showing afterwards, but it didn't matter. I already had the apartment. The property management employee met me at the building, but really had no clue what he was doing. He was clearly a maintenance guy who had been asked to show the apartment because he was in the area, and they didn't have their usual staff to show me around. My apartment was upstairs, so we creeped up the rickety stairs to the second floor, and I noted right away that everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, as if it had been abandoned for months. It had a simple layout: bathroom at the top of the stairs, bedroom to the right of that, kitchen, and then living room. I did notice there were pennies in all the rooms too, but I just figured that the previous tenant left in a hurry. In the main hallway, there was a door to an attic. This attic was the size of the entire apartment, and I was stoked about having the extra space. The door had a latch that you could put a padlock on, which I found strange, but I figured it had been used for the owner's storage in the past and might not have been accessible to the tenants. The maintenance man opened the door to the attic and tried to flip the switch, but we quickly discovered that the utilities had been shut off. It was a bright and sunny day, so we didn't need to turn on the lights until this point, and decided that enough light was filtering into the attic to still be able to check it out. At the top of the stairs, spray painted on the walls, was the words, "Blood Ben." I noted out loud how creepy it was, but I figured I could just put a poster over it anyway. The maintenance guy responded with how the previous tenants smoked in the building, which I could clearly smell, and that there was a no smoking policy in their apartments. I told him that was fine, I don't smoke, and after that, he showed me out and I got the keys to the apartment the next day. It was still the last week of classes, and I was really good friends with one of the older lunch ladies, who I'll call S, at the university cafeteria. We were fast friends, and she really played the role of cool aunt to me when I was living in the college town. Over my crappy cafeteria meal, I told her all about the new apartment and Blood Ben. After we speculated on what it meant, S offered to come cleanse the apartment for me the next day. So she came over with her little dog, saged the apartment, and she thought the apartment suited me. I really took ownership over my first place, excited to finally be on my own after what had felt like a failure to launch for my first 5 or so years of adulthood. Before I moved my things in, I scrubbed the place down. I hung my Harry Potter posters over the Blood Ben in the attic and collected all the pennies everywhere. As I was washing the windows, I found a necklace hanging from one of the front windows. It was an Eye of Horus. I decided to Google the significance and learned that it was a symbol of protection and good health. I don't know if I liked the meaning of it or it was just too creeped out to take it down, but I really felt like I needed to leave it there. As I made my way through the entire apartment on my cleaning spree, I found a wallet in a drawer in the kitchen. The coin purse was filled with copper pennies, and I realized that all the pennies I had found were copper. They were not the new, shinier ones. I realized that the pennies were in 2 places: the center of each room and in the corners of the rooms. I Googled this and discovered that the ones in the center of the rooms were for good luck, and the ones in the corners were used to protect from ghosts and spirits. I kept looking through the wallet and found that the card slots were filled with business cards for nearby counties, victims, witness office, several psychologists, a defense attorney, child protective services, other things that led me to believe that the person who lived in my apartment before me had experienced some violent child custody issues and probably mental health issues as well. Well, that really explained the need for protection. I shrugged it off and put the wallet back in the drawer. That night, I moved everything I had from my dorm to my apartment, knowing my furniture and some other things would be brought by my family from 3 hours away over the weekend. I laid down in my apartment for my first night, sleeping on the mattress pad from my dorm, watching The Office on my phone. I was exhausted after doing so much work on my own and happy to be cozy and in for the night. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, walking through the attic above me. I froze. I could hear blood rushing to my ears as panic coursed through me. I could hear my heart pounding unusually loud and quickly scanned my brain for a logical explanation. I landed on one quickly. The man who lives in the other upstairs apartment has a finished attic that serves as a bedroom. I remember this from the online listing, which showed pictures from all 4 apartments in the fourplex. He must be walking around in his bedroom, and the sound must just be carrying across the empty wood floor attic since there's nothing to absorb the sound in my half. It was a good enough answer for me for the night, and I rolled onto my side and fell asleep to the sounds of Jim, Dwight, and Michael Scott. I didn't yet have pots and pans, so the next morning I microwaved some food for breakfast. As I was waiting for the timer to count down, I looked on the top of my cupboards and noticed something else left by the previous tenants. It was really inconspicuous. There was no surprise that I missed it yesterday or during my tour. I climbed up on the counter and pulled it down. In my hands was a 2-quart mason jar filled with stuff, and nothing cutesy. There were needles and pins and rusty bent nails, broken glass, something that looked like rotted meat, some herbs, and it was filled up with some mystery liquid. My stomach dropped, and for some reason, witch bottle came to my mind. Now, I love spooky and paranormal and shows like The X-Files, but I had never heard of a witch bottle before. I have never dabbled in witchcraft besides trying, and failing, to play light as a feather, stiff as a board in Girl Scouts. So I pulled out my phone and typed it into Google, and found some old GeoCities page with neon colors on a black background that explained to me that it was probably filled with urine and possibly other things. It was created to protect its creator from negative psychic energy. I marched downstairs to the back alley and dumped that thing in the trash. I was a little concerned about inviting some bad juju from getting rid of it, but decided since it was made to protect someone who abandoned it, I was safe. Plus, I wasn't even sure I believed in bad juju. Over the next few months, I was able to get all my furniture added into my new apartment. I got a cat, and I really made the place my home. Since the attic door made my heart pound every time I walked by it, I decorated the door with a bunch of old Harry Potter magazine clippings and whatnot. I put a padlock on it because I kept hearing those footsteps. Maybe the guy next door could get into my attic? There was an old door between the two, and I guess I didn't examine it closely enough, and it could be used. I wasn't going to let an intruder come in and get me in the middle of the night, so a padlock on the attic seemed good enough. In spite of the attic, my apartment had a lot of light and had a good atmosphere. Fall started. I lived close enough to campus that I could easily drop by and change before work or spend a little time snuggling my cat before an evening of student government meetings. I had been living in the apartment for 5 months in late October, and this particular day we were facing very strong winds. These winds rattled the windows, blew your car door shut when you tried to open it. You know, the type of winds you expect with a storm on a seafront. I arrived home, and when I reached the top of the stairs and rounded the corner, my attic door was wide open. My heart was in my throat. My stomach dropped. I had that head rush of panic. I quickly packed an overnight bag and some supplies for my cat and scooped him up. I sped off to campus to tell Ass, who was working the dinner shift at the cafeteria. Ass was convinced that the door opened because of the wind. There must be a draft in the attic that caused the door to open. I couldn't be consoled. The door had a padlock on it, and the lock was still locked on the ring. Someone either came into my apartment to unlock it, or I had no other explanation, except maybe Blood Ben. It was agreed that I would spend the night on S's couch, and since night had already fallen, We would together check out my apartment come daylight. The next morning, S and I brought my kitty back to my apartment and looked around. The atmosphere had significantly changed in the place. While before my apartment had held all kind of light and felt warm and cozy, suddenly it felt shadowy and cold. The door was still open, so we unlocked the padlock and relocked the door shut. S was convinced that I must have messed with the lock and not remembered it. But she might have just been saying that to comfort me. She didn't visit my apartment again. I brushed off the atmospheric change to the fact that it was fall. I had to keep living in the place for another 7 months, so I just convinced myself that the changes weren't there. After that, I started waking in the night. I've experienced sleep paralysis before, but what I started to experience couldn't be that. I would wake up and feel an energy in the doorway. Like I could see the outline of a large figure, but there was nothing there. I would wake up and stare at it, trying to figure out what I was seeing. I would move. I would often roll onto my side and just stare at it over my shoulder. Sometimes I would wake up to the sound of my cat playing with his jingle balls bouncing down the stairs. I would audibly tell him to stop playing, then I'd feel him in the bed. He wasn't pushing the jingle balls around. He was asleep next to me. I would tell myself there must be a draft and force myself to sleep. I would sometimes feel this energy staring at me from the hallway when I was in the living room. I started cutting through the kitchen to get to the living room so I didn't have to walk by the attic door. The Harry Potter decorations were no longer helping ease my anxiety. I could sense something sinister staring at me from the attic when I walked up to my car, parked on the street in front of the building. I would look over my shoulder at my building, and I would be surprised not to see a face in the attic window. Was I going crazy? I had lived in this apartment for 5 months without any issues, and all of a sudden I'm filled with anxiety any time I needed to go home. I got another cat to keep mine entertained, and I returned home as little as I could, usually only to sleep and shower. Because of my anxiety in my apartment, I often spent my time on campus or at friends' homes. But one night, 3 friends decided to come over so we could watch a YouTube series together on my Apple TV. We all watched a couple of episodes and were having a good time. They wanted to go outside for a cigarette, but commented about how -30 temperature was too cold for them. Feeling emboldened by a few beers, I offered my attic. The previous tenant smoked in there. It still smelled like smoke up there anyways. And besides, these guys didn't believe in my ghost. We climbed the stairs, and when we hit the top stair, one of my guests said, "We have to get out of here. Now. We can't be in here." Great. This was comforting. When we all got back to my living room, he told me about how, when he hit the top stair, he instantly felt that there was something that hated him deeply. He babbled on about needing to ground himself to a tree, and that he didn't believe in magic, but his mother told him that if he ever felt unsafe, he should imagine himself attached to a tree. I didn't really listen that closely to him explaining. I was too preoccupied that my ghost was confirmed by someone else. The 3 of them left shortly after, and I was left alone with my kitties and my ghost. After another 7 or 8 months in the apartment, I was able to secure another living situation. It wasn't ideal, but it wouldn't be haunted, and it would cost a lot less to split the rent. I scrubbed out the place, moved everything on my own, and saved the little bit of storage in my attic for last. I got one of my new roommates and a friend who claimed to be sensitive to spirits come over to help me. This sensitive friend had wanted to come to my apartment before, but after the incidents with my other 3 friends needing to leave the attic, I didn't want anything to get stirred up. The 3 of us hauled everything out. I told my friend that he could spend some time in the attic, but he needed to lock the apartment behind him. I was going to drop off the keys. I said goodbye and went to my new home, leaving the Eye of Horus and wallet of pennies where I found them. The sensitive friend messaged me a few hours later. There was a doorway between the attics. It was sealed, but it was covered in chalk writings in Latin. He didn't tell me what it said, but that the door was used as some sort of portal, and that there was one violent spirit in the attic, and he wanted me. Things likely would have escalated if I had stayed. He reckoned that I got out just in time. For the remaining 4 years that I lived in that town, I avoided that street. The handful of times I had to drive by that building, I felt the same energy in the attic, staring me down from the window as I drove by. My experience growing up in a haunted house, by Reddit user EasternTune4592. I grew up in the 90s in Minnesota. My parents divorced when I was 8, and we spent every other weekend in my dad's haunted house. This house had every type of ghost you can think of. A shadow man in a trench coat and brimmed hat, another separate shadow figure that danced down the hallway, a man dressed to go fishing, a doppelganger of my father, 2 giggling little girls, and many other unseen entities. The dishwasher, radios, and lights would turn themselves on and off randomly. Loud banging could be heard on walls and doors. Door handles would jiggle and turn on their own. Feelings of being touched or caressed in the shower were reported. My father also had an incident where he felt someone crawl into bed with him in the middle of the night when he was the only one home. My uncle reported seeing 2 little girls giggling and singing in the basement one night while sleeping downstairs. Upon awakening the next morning, he discovered there were no kids in the house that night. So who did he hear playing in the middle of the night? One sunny Saturday morning, while visiting my dad, my brother and I were up early watching cartoons. I was 8 years old and my brother was 3. As we sat on the couch, we heard 3 alerting knocking sounds on the wall, 5 to 6 feet behind us. Our heads quickly snapped back to look at the wall, where the sound was coming from, but we saw nothing. My brother and I quickly turned to look at each other with frightened eyes. I, being the older sister, tried to be brave. I told him it was nothing. As we turn our attention back to the cartoons, my little 8-year-old brain is spinning. We hear it again. This time, it's coming from somewhere in the kitchen, off to our left. It's not as loud as the first time, and the sound is different, like someone is knocking on the kitchen counter this time, instead of the wall. We quickly strain our necks to peek inside the kitchen with lightning speed to catch whoever or whatever is making that noise. Again, there is nothing there. I take a deep breath. Once again, I pretended to be brave and tell my little brother, "It's nothing, just ignore it." My heart is thumping in my chest, and there are butterflies in my stomach as the familiar anxiety grows worse with each passing second. I tuck myself up on the couch in a ball, not wanting my legs to dangle off the sides. I no longer feel safe. Nothing is to be trusted. This time, the sound's coming from the dining room. I can tell the noise is coming from the dining table this time. I can see the entire table from where I am sitting, and there is nothing on the table that should be making the noise. No one except me and my brother are awake. There is no one in the dining room. There is no logical reason for this knocking noise that is moving around us. Just then, I realized the knocking sounds have been moving in a big circle around us. If this invisible entity is to move any closer to us, the next logical place for it to be would be the living room, where me and my brother are currently sitting. This time, the noise was coming from the coffee table, sitting less than 1 foot away from us. I instantly flip over the back of the couch in a reverse somersault position and run at superhuman speed to my father's bedroom. In a panic, I completely left my little 3-year-old brother behind to fend for himself. Lucky he wasn't too far behind. We sneak into our father's room and quietly lay on the floor. Our dad would have been really upset if we woke him up early on a Sunday morning, even for a ghost. In our commotion, we wake up our 6-year-old sister who is sleeping on our dad's floor. So we quietly whisper what just happened out in the living room to our sister. As we are telling her the story, something catches our eye. We can see a black shadow under the small space between the bottom of the door and the plush carpet. The black shadow is slowly pacing back and forth in the hallway, just on the other side of the bedroom door. Back and forth, like the shadow is waiting for us. Unfortunately, I don't remember what happened after this point. Somehow the rest of that memory has been lost with time. But I know for sure we didn't open that door. The Beach House. Submitted by user NoFrank. I used to live in a 1927 beach house in Oceanside, California. I got the house from the original owner. She'd bought it when she was a young woman and finally had to get rid of it because she was going to a nursing home. So she was the only person who had ever lived in the home. The house was long and narrow, with the living room at the front and the biggest bedroom at the back, at the end of a long hallway. The way my bed was positioned, I could see partway down the hall while I was in bed. One night, I woke up about 4 a.m. and there was a woman in the doorway. A slender woman in a floaty party dress and a leghorn hat with a drink in her hand. She was talking to someone just out of my range of sight, or at least I thought she was. She was gesturing and her mouth was moving, and every so often she laughed or take a drink, except that she wasn't making any noise. Also, she was white, completely white, beautifully dressed and coiffed and everything, but totally devoid of color, and I could sort of see through her. I shut my eyes and opened them again, and she was still there, still chatting away at whoever was in the hall. It was very dark, and she was kind of glowing a little, and I felt like I was in a bubble. I lay there and watched her for what seemed like a very long time, and then I woke up suddenly and it was morning, and I thought I'd had a hell of a dream. The only problem was, I saw her again a month or so later, and then again after that. Always in the same dress and hat, always with a drink, always leaning gracefully against the doorway of the bedroom, chatting with an invisible guest. It was very weird to wake up and see her, but after a while I kind of got used to it, and eventually I just accepted that I had a ghost. It was an old house, and the woman who owned it had died shortly after she went to the nursing home. Maybe she'd had a lot of parties in the house back in the day and she liked to revisit them. I never got any sense of dread from the woman. She never really scared me. What I did not do was tell anyone about her, because I was pretty sure I'd sound like a loon. When I got married, my husband, a career Marine not given to flights of fancy or odd hallucinations, moved into the house with me. I saw the ghost shortly afterwards, and I finally got up the nerve to ask if he'd ever seen anything odd in the house. He looked immensely relieved and said, "Oh, the white lady. I've seen her a couple of times. I thought I was dreaming." To this day, if you ask either one of us if we believe in ghosts, we will reply in the affirmative. We never tried to find pictures of the former owner of the house or anything. The white lady didn't frighten us. We didn't want to exorcise her. She was just there, a fact of the house, and we loved the house, so we left her alone, and she left us alone. Every so often we'd wake up, and there she'd be, endlessly talking to her guest and sipping her drink. We saw her separately many times, and on at least one occasion my husband and I saw her at the same time. We lived companionably with the white lady for 6 years, and when we moved out of the house, I wondered if we should tell the next tenants about her. My husband said no. They'll find out on their own, he said. I wonder if they ever did. The Cursed Home, submitted by user Themiscyra. When I was almost 15, my family moved into our very own house. This was a big deal, the culmination of years of effort on our parents' part. All my life we'd been renting, and now this house was ours. I wish we'd never moved into it. The house was definitely haunted. Sometimes I think it was cursed. We were out of there in less than a decade. My dad lost his job and couldn't find any more work in the software industry, where he'd been working for most of his adult life. My mother's body was falling apart in 3 or 4 different ways, and her mind was starting to go. She died a few years back, just a few months past her 53rd birthday. Anyway, the haunting. It started small. Your standard feeling of dread in specific parts of the house, and more alarmingly, scratching in the walls of my bedroom at night. We had cats, and we hadn't seen a single mouse or rat or any sign of vermin, since the one time a mouse had emerged in our basement. It saw the cats watching it with great interest and vanished into the night. But still, every night, when the house got quiet, aside from the usual sounds of settling, There was scratching in the walls next to my bed. Around 3 years after we moved in, I woke up one night, all but frozen in terror. I can't tell you exactly what I feared in that moment. It was just a feeling, the sort of primal fear you get when there's a violent storm raging all around you, rattling the windows and letting off bursts of thunder so loud it's like a bomb goes off. Except the sky was clear. No storm, nothing, just the fear. I describe it later as feeling like there was angels and demons battling over my head, vast and terrible forces fighting some vast and terrible battle, and all I could do was pray that their attention do not fall on me, and I somehow survived the fight. Maybe I had just woken from a nightmare. I don't know. I still don't know. I just lay there, already wide awake, and growing more alert and aware by the second, until finally I realized I desperately needed to pee. I screwed up my courage as tight as it would go, and I bolted down the hall to the bathroom. I did my business, and then as I was washing my hands, I looked up at the mirror. There was something wrong about my reflection. It was moving just a little out of sync. Like it wasn't my reflection, but someone behind the glass trying to imitate my movements. As I stared, it noticed me. It stopped and turned its head, looking directly into my eyes. The eyes of my reflection was utterly black. Pupils, iris, the lights, everything. Just black to every edge. And as I watched, this thing wearing my face began to grin. My own lips twisted into the creepiest, most predatory smile I've ever seen. I bolted back to my room, leaving all the lights on. I don't think I got that much sleep that night. I was already a practicing witch by this time, and it wasn't long before I warded the entire house. I haven't spent a night without some kind of protection around me or my person since. But it wasn't quite enough. There was still something in that house. Maybe my wards hampered it somehow. Maybe it only ever wanted to toy with me. I don't know. What I do know is that as everything went to crap, not that long before the mortgage company took our house and we had to leave, it crept into my mind again and played one last trick. Our basement was partially finished. Our laundry room was in the unfinished part, and there was a sort of rough, crumbling section of concrete floors near the machines, around and under the sink. I guess I always figured it was water damage or something. One night, I had one of the most vivid dreams I've ever experienced. Usually my dreams lose color and detail in my memory, but this one still feels like it actually happened. I was following some figure down into the basement. I couldn't see them clearly, but when we got to the laundry room, the section of floor was open, and there was a dead girl laying there. I knew that someone who had lived in this house had killed her and left her there. I never contacted the police. What was I going to say? That I dreamed of some decades-old murder and I had no proof beyond a nightmare? I never dug up the floor either, obviously. All I really know is that there was something dark and hateful in that house. And in the time we spent there, our lives got worse. Sometimes I'm all but convinced that house killed my mom. I guess the people who bought it from the bank after we left ended up flipping it, and good luck to them. But I wouldn't live there again if you paid me. And that's all for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed these stories as much as I did. And as always, please let me know your thoughts on these hauntings. What about you? Have you ever lived in a haunted home? Or did your neighborhood growing up ever have a haunted home everyone avoided? I'd love to hear all about it. Also, since this is a very small podcast written and produced by myself, I would really appreciate it if you liked, subscribed, left me a review, whatever you need to do, and wherever you listen to this. Lastly, the podcast just launched a YouTube page as well, and on that page I post not only the podcast, but also additional stories that did not make the cut for the episodes, and shorts that are previews of upcoming stories. So, if you'd like to see content more often than every 15 days, please give me a follow there as well, and comment letting me know that you came from the podcast. Next episode, we'll be taking a step outside of the haunted home and cover stories of haunted streets and neighborhoods. So I'll hope you'll join me again. In the meantime, I hope all you ghouls and ghosts stay safe and curious, and I'll see you next time.